Hello. This video is about the new version 2022R1. It was released on February 28th, and I'm going to go over the new features and changes that were introduced in this version. Now, some of the highlights are that isCOBOL is now certified with Java 17. The IDE's Eclipse base version has been updated. Load balancing was added to the web client, and it's been separated into its own installation. There are new ways to handle configuration files. The parent window will darken when a modal window needs the user's attention. And copy resource has been implemented to include font and bitmaps inside of your class instead of distributing them separately. So let's get started. We've certified version 2022R1 for execution with Java 8, 11, and 17. Now these are the long-term support versions. Version 2022R1 is the first isCOBOL version to be certified on Windows 11 in combination with Java 11. We've added a few different ways to augment your configuration files. We've added a configuration variable, iscobol.conf.copy, so that you can append an additional configuration file. For instance, you might have a main global configuration file and set iscobol.conf.copy to point to a customer-specific property file. And in your program, you can use the new $config library to reset the variables to their original values, to add a new configuration file to the current ones, or to do both. C-tree-RTG made improvements to performance and ease of use in its new version 3, which we introduced in 2021. Now you can set the isCOBOL file index file version to 2, or file version in your C-tree comp file, and it'll create new files that are backwards compatible. Now, one of the big changes in C-tree-RTG 3 is a large page size. So if you want to use your older files from 11.9, for instance, which is C-tree-RTG 2, you'll need to either change the page size in your server configuration file back to 8192, or update your existing files by rebuilding them with ctutil-compact. There's more information in our documentation if you want to do this. For JISAM, in some rare cases, you might need to change the default behavior of adding with lock when a file is opened output or extend. You can set these two variables to false, but be aware that it might affect performance. You can now specify a timeout for a message box to close automatically as if the user pressed the OK button. This is very helpful if you are running the program in the background and you forgot a message box that comes up and freezes the process. The page eject on close was always available for other print files. In version 2022R1, it's been expanded to support -pspooler direct. Variants IDE is based on Eclipse, and we keep up to date with the stable Eclipse versions. 2022R1 includes support for Eclipse's 2021-09 version 4.21. This runs on Java 11 and in Windows 11. Now, if you want to keep Java 1.8 in your production environment, you have a few options. If you do nothing, the default setting in Preferences is to compile with Java 11 or 17, whichever one you chose when you installed the IDE, but create a class that can be run with Java 8. This uses the -source and -target compile options. If you prefer to compile with Java 8, you can change the executable version that's shown on the screen. A new system theme means that it uses system colors instead of the same default colors. The console preference page now has a word wrap in the console output. Now previously you didn't have this option and the output could sometimes go off the screen. The previous option, known as last edit location, is now called previous edit location, and it holds 15 distinct edit locations, so you can move around in your code to the places that you've been editing. Previous versions offered horizontal scrolling in Linux and Mac. Support has been added to Windows now as well. 2022R1 adds clustering to the web client. Now, in earlier versions, you started the web client server once on one server. You can still do that. That hasn't changed. But we've added the option to spread your web client connections over several clusters, each with several session pools. Now, cluster servers are a stateless, lightweight module that are similar to the web client server, but The clusters only handle the parts of the web client server that have to do with the web. It resends messages between the application and the browser, and it handles SSL, authentication, and logging out, for instance. The cluster servers use a mechanism called a session pool load balancer to spread the connections out among several session pools. The rest of the work the web client server once did is now done by the session pools. Each session starts, manages, and communicates with an application instance, handling things like fonts and configuration. And the administration console is still the central place where you can view all connections to all cluster servers and session pools. All of these are connected by a secret key in their configuration file. In the demo later on, we'll look at the new admin screen. It separates the server and application configuration into easily reached sections. You can still monitor your user screens and take control of them if you wish. The web client has grown into a separate product, so now the web client's installation has its own setup instead of being part of the SDK setup. GUI controls have been upgraded. The text in an entry field normally starts right up against the left margin. Now this can look crowded or hard to read on busy screens. Now you can set the entry field's margin width so the text starts in a little bit. We're going to see this in the demo. Bitmap controls have had a transparent color property for a while to remove one of the colors in a bitmap. Now you can do the same with bitmaps that you display inside a push button. We've updated the look for tree views. The screenshots here show the tree view on the left without the flat style, with the plus and the minus signs and the dotted connection lines, and the flat style on the right with the arrows. The LM Zoom Layout Manager can be set in the configuration file to give every window resizing abilities. Now you can control how much the font is altered to make sure it doesn't become too small or too large. And finally, your users can filter out some rows in your grid, and we've added a new event, Message Finish Filter, so you can find out what rows are still visible after they've set a filter. For library routines, I've already talked about $config. We've also added $getC. This returns the next keystroke from the user. Now that you can print asynchronously, you may need to check that all the print jobs are done before exiting or moving on. We've added a new opcode to WinPrinter for this. And now that you can get icons from a font, we've added a routine to create a bitmap strip with combinations of font, color, and text from symbol fonts like Font Awesome. And we've added the copy resource syntax to the copy verb. You would use this to load fonts and bitmaps into your classes so that you don't need to provide them separately. And we've enhanced the hamburger menu in $menu by giving you settings to display it expanded, to set the height of the area covered by the hamburger menu, to set separate rules for the layout manager to apply to the hamburger menu, to add a search panel to the menu, and to prevent the menu's tree view from overlapping the Windows status bar. We're going to look at this in the demo. There are 3 new configuration settings. When you display a modal window, like a message box or a pop-up that disables the parent screen, it can confuse users when they see 2 screens. To help your user, it's considered best practices to darken the parent window, keeping the modal window visually distinct. Now you can set this in your application with one configuration variable, isCOBOL.GUI.Windows darkening. The value is the percentage of darkening that you want. The default transparent color in bitmaps is a light gray. But sometimes you might not want this color to be transparent. For instance, if you have a bitmap on your screen with the gray color and you want it to show. For cases like that, we've added a configuration variable to change that default behavior and make the light gray display on your screen. And for a long time, you've been able to replace the default message box with a custom message box. Now, when you're running in the thin client or web client, you can add an S to access the custom message box program from the server and a C to access it from the client. To increase compatibility with Micro Focus COBOL, we've added with debugging mode syntax. When your program includes the statement, every code line with a D character in column 7 is executed. Comment the with debugging mode line out, and those D lines become comments. We've added XML files to our supported file types. Invoke is used in object-oriented programming, and we've added a third type of the invoke syntax. the isCOBOL compile compatibility switches have been expanded. -CRKO is useful when using the isMigrate tool to move data out of RM format data files, or when using the RM file connector to read RM format files from isCOBOL. The -CR option is a catch-all for RM COBOL syntax compatibility, and we've added more character display syntax. And we've already talked about the copy resource, which is also an isCOBOL compatible addition. The row set positioning syntax works with cursors to improve performance and increase compatibility with the DB2 precompiler. The code on the left creates a cursor in the customer database, and on the right, the SQL sets the cursor at the third record. We've made some great changes to our debugger. Hovering over a variable or double-clicking it will display the value of that variable in the debugger. If it's a large one, it can take over your screen or the output window, like the top screenshot here. Now you can set max text length to cut off the display to a manageable length. In the screenshots, I've set the max text length to 30, and you can see only the first 30 characters of the variable is displayed with 3 dots at the end in the screenshot on the bottom. You only have to set this setting one time, and it's saved in the debugger properties in your home directory. More keyboard shortcuts have been added for better accessibility, and now when the focus is moved away from the debugger's command line, it'll automatically be returned when you start typing again. In our EIS, or Extend Internet System, we have a couple of changes. We've added some new ELK directives. Those are the ones that you use to configure the output from our Service Bridge tool. You can set a field to initialize to null rather than spaces or zeros. There's a code snippet here setting that, and a screenshot of the new checkbox for it in the IDE. You can also set fields to accept or return base 64 or hex binary values. This was available for SOAP services. We've added the ability to do this in REST services as well. When you're using HTTP client to interact with web services, you may want to set a timeout so you can avoid hanging from an unresponsive URL. You can use these new methods to do that. And now you can initialize the group item before reading a stream of XML or JSON data. A couple of changes to our tools. By default, the Jiffy file editor uses the default font of the operating system's look and feel, but now you can change that using a new configuration variable. This is helpful if you want to make it larger, or you want to match the font of your application if you use Jiffy in your application. The screenshot in the slide is the result of passing a value of Arial-16. The JDBC to FD utility creates select statements, file definitions, and working storage copybooks from relational database tables. Without this new configuration, the JDBC to FD tool looks at all of the schemas in all of your databases. Now setting this variable true limits what's returned to a manageable amount. So let's take a look at some of these things. I'm going to run the samples program. And at the top of the samples, we always have our new features for each version, and it goes down to version 2017R1. So if you want to check out what's new in each version, this is a great way. We're going to start with the creation of a bitmap strip using Font Awesome. So I'll click on this radio button, and what it's doing here is it has 3 font values to display these 3 icons, and then these 3 color values for the color of the icons. And it created a bitmap strip and assigned them to these locations as 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to change the font, but not the color of the second and third one. And you can see down here that the font's changed. It created a new bitmap strip, and this is now 1, 2, and 3. The next thing to look at is the entry field margins. Normally, when you type something in to an entry field, it is right up next to the left margin. By setting the new margin width, you can move it in so it's not quite so close as I've done right here. So you can see that we have a margin width of 10 pixels in this case. Next, we'll look at the hamburger menu. And we have several new features here. We've added the ability to display it expanded. You can see here it's expanded. To add a search panel, and there's a search panel up here. Right now when we display it, it doesn't cover the status bar, but if you want it to cover the status bar, you can do that. Now check here, and you see it goes all the way down to the bottom of the screen. And I can override that with the height variable by setting it to a specific height. Now for the layout manager, the screen itself has a layout manager of LM Zoom, but the menu does not. So when I zoom the screen, the font in the hamburger menu doesn't change. When I set the layout manager for the hamburger menu to LM Zoom, and then I zoom it, the font in the hamburger menu is also enlarged. And let's look at the new configuration variable handling. This sample will set this configuration variable to this value. And there's my set, and then I can accept it and find that yes, it has been set. Now I can reset it so that it goes back to the original configuration, and since this was not set at all, when I accept it, it's not going to be there. And I'll reset it so we can see that it's again 2022R1. I can also use $config to append a configuration variable to the current ones. So let's take a look at what's in this file. It's the one that's released with the sample. We can see that it's setting this same variable here to the value of loaded. So right now it's 2022R1. If I set it from the file and accept it, it's going to be loaded. I'm going to reset that. And I can also do an append to append the configuration. However, that will set this twice, and the second one will take precedent. The second one is loaded, so it's showing as loaded. Okay, let's take a look at the new Web Client Load Balance feature. For this demonstration, I have started in the foreground the application server, the Web Client Cluster, one Web Client session, and the Web Client admin. So I'm going to log into the administration panel. And it comes up on the overview, which is the information about the servers themselves. And it shows that I have one session pool and one app that's running, and a little bit more information about the session pool. If I switch over to the Applications tab, I can see that I have one application called Demo, and I'll click on that. And its setup is separated between Web Config and App Config. Under Web Config, I went down to the Security and changed the value to none. And then on the App Config, first I assigned it to the session pool that I had running. And then I went to the variant section and I typed in the name of my program. So let's run that program. And here's our isControl set. We'll go back to the application window and click on Sessions. Here's my demo session. One more thing I want to show you. I'm going to click on this Inquire value, and in the configuration file, I have the background window to darken to 50%. Because this is a modal window, and I can't click on this back window. So I'm letting my user know that they have to take care of this front window before they move on. And that's a quick look at 2022R1. I hope you give it a try, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at support@variant.com. Thank you.